This book is not about controlling others. It's about seeing the hidden forces that control you. The dark psychology of desire exposes the currents that pull at your choices, twist your emotions, and reshape your sense of self. Every day, invisible strings tug at you. A text that sparks doubt, a compliment that unsettles, a post designed to provoke envy, a voice framing a perfect choice. Some influence is harmless, some bends your mind to another's design. Your job: notice the strings before they tighten. Desire is a machine with 3 gears: source, leverage, and timing. When hidden, subtle, and engineered, you are being controlled. When exposed, you are free. Each chapter of this book sharpens your vision to see influence for what it truly is. You will learn to spot the first flicker of manipulation, pause when urgency is fake, recognize hidden costs in praise, and steady your mind when attention becomes a weapon. Real power begins with observation. Calm is not weakness, it is where truth becomes visible. This is a book about clarity, not cruelty. Influence becomes dangerous only when it bypasses awareness. Trust is currency, honesty is protection, and discernment is your shield. These pages reveal the dark mechanics of manipulation and the clean mechanics of influence, so you can act without surrendering control. Before you begin, remember, this is a mirror, not a toolkit. Use it to reclaim choice, see the unseen, and navigate the shadows with awareness. One question will guide you. What is happening to me right now? When you answer it, you choose. And in that choice, you claim quiet power. Welcome, let the game begin. Chapter 1. The Architecture of Desire. There is a small engine inside you that runs without your applause. Unseen humming, arranging your life like a quiet builder. It builds not with bricks but with want. Desire is the house we walk inside every day without noticing the walls. At its simplest, desire is a signal. A pull toward warmth, food, safety, or a softer feeling when the world feels hard. These are the ancient impulses that kept our ancestors alive. The urge to eat when hungry, to sleep when tired, to find shelter when storms came. Those needs are honest and clear. They ask for life in the present. But desire is also an architect of stories. It does not only point to a loaf of bread. It sketches the life a loaf promises. It whispers that with the right partner, the right job, the right trophy, your life will make sense. That whisper is where things get complicated. Primary desires are the basic beams of the house. Hunger, safety, comfort, and connection. They are wired into us. We recognize them even when we are tired or frightened. Manufactured desires are the wallpaper and the furnishings someone else picks for you and calls inevitable. They are ideas made to look like needs, the newest model that will make you noticed, the image of success that fits a commercial script, the role a relationship sells back to you as meaning. These wants are layered over our primary needs so skillfully that we often can't tell which came from inside and which was staged for us. There's a difference between wanting to survive and wanting to be seen to survive. Survival-based desires are honest. They demand food, shelter, community. Ego-based desires dress survival in fancy clothes. They say, you must be admired to be safe, or you must own this to be respected. The ego turns basic needs into narratives about worth. It asks not just for warmth but for a fire that proves you are worthy of warmth. This is where marketers, social groups, and clever minds find openings. If they can make your ego believe that a product or a badge equals safety or love, they can redirect the flow of your wants. The mind organizes these wants without asking for your permission. It is not lazy or cruel. It is efficient. It relies on shortcuts and patterns. What worked before, what felt good, what brought relief. Memory and emotion are the foreman. When a small action once led to comfort, the mind files it as a reliable plan and nudges you toward it again. This is how habit grows, and how influence finds purchase. Repeated rewards create paved roads in the brain. Soon, even when the original reward is absent or hollow, the road still tempts you. We are social animals, and our desires are social constructions as much as they are private feelings. From childhood, we learn scripts about what makes a life acceptable. The kind of job that proves success, the look that sings attractiveness, the achievement that signals worth. These scripts are passed on by families, peers, culture, and media. They sound like advice, but they are blueprints. When you accept a script without examining it, you let other builders design your house. This is not merely about objects, it is about identity. Wanting is often shorthand for becoming. You want a certain car, not because it moves you from A to B, but because it tells a story about who you are. You want approval not for the warmth of the interaction, but because approval supplies an identity. I am competent. I am loved. When desire becomes identity, it becomes stubborn. It resists correction because changing a want can feel like losing a self. Recognizing the architecture of desire begins with small observations. Notice the moments when a want arrives like a whisper after a specific trigger, an ad, a compliment, a memory. Track how quickly the feeling connects to a story about who you would be if you got it. Ask whether the want promises immediate relief or a lasting change in your life. Most manufactured desires promise a big identity shift from a small action. That mismatch is a clue. Another clue is urgency that someone else supplies. Scarcity, deadlines, limited editions. These are techniques that speed up decision-making by turning reflection into panic. When the mind is hurried, it reverts to old roads. Marketers and manipulators know this and build false urgencies to keep you from stepping back and testing whether a desire is truly yours. There is also a softer, quieter method, mirroring your hidden aim and returning it like a mirror that flatters. When someone reflects what you secretly crave, the match feels like home. You are vulnerable in that comfort because the reflection confirms your private story. Skilled influencers create environments that echo parts of you back until you accept their version of what you want. This knowledge can be gentle rather than grim. Understanding how desires are formed and prioritized gives you choice. It does not erase the pull, but it helps you place it on a table and examine it. You can ask practical questions. Will this satisfy what I need tomorrow? Who prospers if I act on this wish? Am I buying a thing or adopting an identity someone else designed? These questions slow the mind's habitual leaps and give room for a different builder, the thoughtful self, to intervene. Desire will never be neutral. It brings color and motion to life. It makes evenings meaningful and work worth doing. The goal is not to remove desire, but to read the plans before you agree to live inside them. Learn to distinguish beams from wallpaper, wants that feed life from wants that borrow your life's shape. That is the skill this chapter begins to teach. How to see the architecture so you can choose which rooms to inhabit and which designs to reject. When you do, your wants can serve you again and not someone else's quiet, efficient plan. Chapter 2. The hidden blueprint of your unconscious wants. There is a map inside you that you did not draw, and it guides your footsteps like a ghost with kind intentions. It promises what you long for before you can say the words. The unconscious is not magic. It is memory made into habit and feeling. From the earliest moments of life, our minds take pictures, small scenes of comfort and fear, and stitch them into a private blueprint. A warm voice in a cold night, a hand that tugs you close, a look that withholds. These moments leave impressions that quietly shape what you want. You carry those early blueprints into adult rooms and call the patterns taste or luck, but they are designs written long before you knew how to read them. Psychoanalysts name these invisible forces. Modern psychology measures their echoes. What they show is simple and unsettling. Much of what nudges you toward a person, a job, or a habit is an echo of past reliefs and pains. When someone repeats a phrase from your childhood, when a scene reminds you of a forgotten comfort, a small part of you relaxes and recognizes a safe path. That recognition feels like chemistry or fate, but it is often a match between a present cue and an old image. Childhood programming is not an accusation, it is an explanation. We are children for longer than we remember, learning the easiest way to survive emotionally. If your care arrived mixed with criticism, you learned to seek approval that comes at a cost. If comfort came only after you performed, you learned to trade achievement for belonging. These early trades set prices you still pay. They teach you how to make deals with others. Which parts of you are negotiable? Which parts must be hidden to be loved? This is why lovers often look like parents, and why relationships loop around familiar wounds. People do not choose partners from an empty shelf. They choose from a catalogue of what once soothed them. That familiarity feels like relief because it answers an old question. Will I be known? But relief can be deceptive. The same pattern that soothed you can also bind you. Repeating the same drama is not a moral failing. It is the mind running a known program because it believes that program once kept you alive. Others learn to read these blueprints before you do. Human faces and gestures are maps to trained observers. A careful listener notices the tiny signals that say, "I seek rescue," or "I fear being seen." Marketers and manipulators tune into these hints and offer exactly the thing you unconsciously crave. A product that promises acceptance. A leader who echoes your old fears. A romantic interest who reflects the right mixture of warmth and distance. All of these can be presented in ways that feel like home. The skill to mirror someone's hidden wants is powerful because it bypasses deliberation. It speaks directly to the ancient parts of the mind that respond before language form. You might think that knowing this makes you weak, as if your choices are puppets on a string. The opposite is true. Knowing the blueprint gives you a chance to redraw it. The first step is to notice the repetition without shame, to watch the pattern of your life as if you were reading someone else's novel. When you see the scenes that repeat, the same heartbreak, the same rescue, the same compromise, curiosity replaces blame. You can ask simple questions. When did I first feel this? What did I learn about being loved? What price did I pay for belonging? Memory work is gentle work. It often begins with small experiments. Refuse a familiar script in a low-stakes moment. Speak a truth that used to be hidden. Or choose an opposite response to the one your past recommends. These acts are not dramatic revolutions. They are tiny edits to the blueprint. Over time, they change what your unconscious expects. Habit is rewritten by repetition the same way it was written in the first place. Another tool is language. Saying aloud what you feel makes the unconscious shape itself into words, and words can be examined. When you name the old scene behind a modern craving, it loses the power to run without your consent. The urge still arrives, but now you can see it and decide whether to answer. You begin to differentiate needs that feed life from scripts that merely replay old survival strategies. Compassion is essential in this process. The blueprint carried you through childhood. It did what it could with the materials it had. Blame only creates a secondary wound. Gentle curiosity repairs. When you treat your impulses as understandable messages rather than moral failures, you open a different kind of freedom, one that involves patience and steady attention. There is also a practical defense. Slow down the decision that feels automatic. The unconscious wants speed because speed reduces analysis. If a choice arrives fast and hot, pause. Breathe. Ask whether the offer responds to an old ache or a real need now. Put distance between your first impulse and your action, and you give the reflective mind a chance to speak. Finally, remember that others will continue to scan the blueprints. This knowledge should make you cautious, not fearful. You cannot hide your human shape, but you can refuse the easy reflections. You can choose to be seen in fuller, truer ways rather than the small bits you learn to trade. You can look for partners, work, and experiences that match the real architecture of your life rather than its shadow. Your unconscious wants are neither enemy nor destiny. They are a map of where you began and a set of directions for where you might go. Learn the lines, question the road, make small changes. Over time, the blueprint will include your choices. Not only your past, then desire will serve you instead of quietly steering you, and that is the beginning of real freedom. Chapter 3. The Biology of Craving. There is a small chemical joke in your brain. It promises joy, then teaches you how to chase it. Inside your skull, a quiet system keeps score of rewards. When something pleases you, a warm touch, a compliment, the rush of winning, your brain releases a messenger called dopamine. Dopamine is not the feeling itself. It is the signal that marks a moment as important, a flashing light that says, "Remember this, seek it again." Over time, those flashes become a loop. Cue, action, reward, and then the memory that nudges you to repeat the behavior. The loop is simple and elegant, and it is the engine of craving. Craving begins as usefulness. If you eat food and feel better, your brain learns the pattern and nudges you toward food when hungry. If someone soothes your fear once, you seek that comfort again when fear returns. But the system is blind to meaning. It cares only about prediction and repetition. It will clamp on to any pattern that reliably predicts relief or excitement, even when the thing you chase is a hollow imitation of what you truly need. This is why experiences can become addictive. The mind prefers certainty. A known spike of pleasure is easier to chase than the slow, complicated work of lasting change. Quick thrills, a social media notification, a late-night text, a flirtatious smile, create small, sharp dopamine hits. Each hit trains you to look for the next one. You start organizing your life around the next signal rather than the deeper needs that build a steady life. The quick reward feels like progress because your brain counts the hits, not the meaning. People can become experiences too. When another person reliably makes you feel seen, admired, or alive, your reward system links them to relief. That link can grow into craving. You come to depend on their presence for the dopamine flashes. An absence feels like withdrawal. This is not moral weakness. It is biology at work. The brain learned which cues predict reward, and it presses for them. When the pattern is a person, the craving can cloak itself in love, longing, or necessity, making rational choices feel impossible. Manipulators understand this biology even when they do not use scientific words. They engineer patterns that create peaks and troughs, emotional highs that promise connection and lows that deepen dependence. The technique is simple. Alternate reward and uncertainty. Give warmth, then withhold it. Praise, then criticism. Availability, then distance. This rhythm keeps the dopamine loop spinning, because the unpredictability makes each reward brighter. Psychologists call this intermittent reinforcement. Irregular rewards produce stronger learning than steady ones. Your brain, hungry for the next hit, becomes more willing to stay in the cycle, investing more attention and energy in the hope of another spark. The peaks feel intoxicating. A sudden compliment can flood you with possibility. A dramatic reconciliation after a fight can feel like proof of deep connection. But the symmetry is dangerous. The lows that punctuate those highs make the highs seem necessary. You begin to believe that only this person, pattern, or experience can deliver the relief you crave. That belief tightens the loop into a trap. Addiction to emotions follows the same blueprint. Some people become hooked not to substances but to moods, drama, intensity, fear, or tenderness. The brain learns to associate certain emotional climates with importance. If your life has been filled with intensity, calm can feel empty. You seek storms because storms have meaning. Tranquil days feel like erasure. Manipulators can exploit that by creating emotional weather. Sudden crises, urgent demands, theatrical gestures. Each storm produces a reward when it resolves. and your brain files the pattern as something to pursue again. Understanding these mechanisms gives you practical power. The first step is to notice the loop where it forms, the cue that triggers you, the routine you follow, and the small reward that reinforces it. Naming the pattern takes away some magic. When you can say, "This is a dopamine loop," you stop being wholly at its mercy. You insert space between the cue and the action, and space reduces compulsion. Another tactic is to change the reward schedule. Instead of giving your nervous system the quick spike it expects, build slower, steadier sources of satisfaction. Meaningful projects, reliable friendships, steady routines that deliver small but consistent payoff. These do not produce the same fireworks, but they reshape the brain's predictions over time. Repetition rewires the loops the same way it created them. Guarding against engineered highs and lows also means watching for patterns of unpredictability. If a relationship or environment feels like an emotional roller coaster that intensifies your highs and deepens your lows, that is a red flag. Ask what is being trained, who benefits when you chase these feelings. Does this rhythm serve your growth, or does it keep you seeking validation from outside? Compassion for yourself is essential. The reward system is faithful. It helped you survive and find comfort. It will continue to create cravings because craving is part of being alive. The goal is not to dull desire, but to direct it with clarity. Learn where your dopamine comes from and whether it nourishes you or erodes you. Choose the people and practices that offer steady light instead of blinding flares. Slow pleasures are harder to sell, but better at building a life that lasts. There will always be moments of rush and moments of withdrawal. That is human. The work here is to notice when biology is being used against you, when someone else sets the tempo of your rewards, and to reclaim the conductor's baton. When you understand the biology of craving, you gain the chance to replace frantic chasing with deliberate choosing. That change is not simple, but it is possible. Small pauses, clearer questions, and kinder routines begin to quiet the loop. Over time, craving can be guided toward what truly sustains you, and the small chemical joke in your brain becomes a partner rather than a trickster. Chapter 4. Emotional Profiling. How they identify your weak spots. There are listeners in the world who do not hear words as much as they hear a rhythm beneath them, a tiny tremor that tells them where your armor is thin. They learn to find that tremor and press. People reveal more than they intend when they speak, move, or falter. Emotional profiling is the quiet art of watching those revealed threads and tracing them back to the places that ache. It is not magic. It is attention trained to notice the small and steady signs beneath performance. A pause that comes too late, a smile that does not reach the eyes, a hand that clenches for a secret second. These are not random. They are messages from parts of you that still speak the language of early safety and fear. Someone who knows how to read them can find the hidden door behind your words. We all leak emotion. It happens when our practiced faces relax and older scripts peek through. In a tense meeting, your voice might tighten when your value is questioned. In a party, you might glance away quickly when a past humiliation is recalled. These micro moments are not flaws. They are honest signals. They tell a careful observer what you care about most when your mask slips. When you understand that, the world is less mysterious. You are not being judged by strangers so much as being reflected back to yourself in ways that can be helpful or harmful. The first skill of emotional profiling is speed. Human minds evolved to assess friend or foe in seconds. Fast readers look for patterns. How you react to praise, how you change when challenged, what phrase makes you start to explain yourself. These patterns are shorthand. They compress long stories into little tests. A person who quickly notes that you respond to authority with deference knows a route to gaining your trust. One who notices you freeze when criticized knows how to unsettle you. Speed is not always cruel. It can be used to protect, but in the hands of someone aiming to control, it becomes a map of leverage. Micro-expressions are the language beneath speech, a flicker of anger, a shadow of fear, a flash of delight. These last only a moment, but they say a lot. You have seen them in yourself, a betrayed look that appears before you force a smile, a tiny lift of the mouth when a memory warms you. Skilled observers catch these signs and fold them into their behavior. They mirror them back in a way that comforts or in a way that confirms dependency. Mirror a wound with tenderness and someone relaxes and trusts you. Mirror it with judgment and someone withdraws and then seeks your approval more fervently. Words also leak intentions. The phrases people repeat, the metaphors they favor, the stories they tell. These are maps of what matters. Someone who constantly describes life as a battle may be living in a climate of fear or competitiveness. Someone who tells stories of being overlooked may be craving recognition. Listeners who pay attention to these verbal fingerprints can anticipate needs before you admit them. That anticipation feels like connection, but it can also be engineering. When someone supplies the comfort you long for, you feel seen. When they then condition that comfort on obedience or reciprocity, you have been profiled. Fears in particular are revealing because they often point to what you most desire. Fear is a negative compass. It marks the edges of a longing. If you fear being invisible, you likely crave being seen. If you fear loss of control, you likely crave safety or power. Others watch these fears and, by addressing them, or pretending to, they can shape your choices. A leader who appears to remove your fear of scarcity can win loyalty. A lover who seems to erase your fear of abandonment can create dependence. The line between help and manipulation is whether your consent and well-being remain central, or whether your fear becomes a lever for someone else's aims. Knowing this does not mean you are helpless. It means something kinder. You can become more aware of the small reveals. Start by simply noticing your own micro moments without harshness. Observe when your voice tightens, when your posture shifts, when you repeat the same story about yourself. These are not indictments. They are clues you can use to understand your care. When you see your pattern clearly, it is harder for someone else to pretend they did you a favor by fixing what they first identified. Another practical move is to control your signals on purpose. Pause before you answer. Practice neutral expressions. Rehearse clear ways to say no. Small habits of slowing down make you less legible to those who would act fast. If you feel an urge to explain or justify, wait. If a compliment makes you anxious, breathe and respond simply. These are not performances. They are small acts of private self-protection that keep your inner architecture from being mapped without your permission. Compassion matters here too. We leak because we are human and because our early needs shaped our nervous systems. Shame about being readable only hands power to others. Gentle acceptance of your patterns lets you work with them rather than fight them. You can use your knowledge to find allies who value you without needing to exploit your weak spots. You can choose relationships that mirror back your strengths instead of your wounds. Finally, remember that emotional profiling can be used for good. Therapists notice micro moments to help you heal. Friends detect when you need support. And leaders can spot talent and place people where they thrive. The skill itself is neutral. It is how it is used that matters. The lesson is to be attentive to who holds your map and what they intend. When someone shows they see you, ask whether they also show they will keep you safe. That simple question steadies the ground. You are not a secret waiting to be solved. You are a person whose small reveals can be treasured or weaponized. Learn the language of your own micro moments, slow the tempo of your responses, and choose mirrors that reflect back what helps you grow. In doing so, you make it harder for others to find your thin spots and easier for you to stand where your wholeness is kept intact. Chapter 5. The Desire Matrix. Mapping what controls you. There are 6 quiet rulers inside every human heart, and they bargain with each other while you sleep. Know which one sits on the throne, and you see the map others use to steer you. Desire is not a single flame but a house of rooms. Some rooms are crowded, some barely used, and some hold things so private you rarely visit them openly. Over time, certain wants become primary engines of your choices. A hunger for safety, a need for belonging, a craving for status, the chase for novelty, the search for meaning, and the wish for certainty. These 6 each have their own logic and voice. They are universal enough to show up in different forms across cultures and generations, yet personal enough to arrange the plot of your life in a unique pattern. Safety asks for predictability and shelter. It prefers steady routines and people who promise reliability. Belonging looks for warmth and acceptance. It will nudge you toward groups that mirror your image back to you. Status seeks recognition and rank. It loves symbols and comparisons that prove worth. Novelty craves the new and the surprising. It lights up at risk and change. Meaning pursues coherence and purpose. It wants your life to make sense in a story larger than the self. Certainty demands clear answers and rules. It resists ambiguity and thrives on authority. None of these is wrong. They are parts of being human. But when one dominates without balance, it can become your map and therefore your vulnerability. Predators, whether lovers, leaders, brands, or sly colleagues, are not mystical. They are careful observers who notice which room you spend the most time in. If your life is organized around safety above all, someone who promises protection will quickly win your trust. If belonging rules, flattering mirrors and invitations will draw you in. If status governs your choices, symbolic rewards and comparisons will guide your steps. The craft of identifying dominance is deceptively simple. Watch where someone is most anxious, where they spend their money, where they tell stories about themselves. Anxiety often points to the house's weak door. A person who constantly worries about being judged is likely living in the kingdom of status. A person who freezes when alone may be ruled by belonging. The clues are in ordinary moments, the purchases, the repeated complaints, the compliments that change someone's posture. Experts call this pattern matching. In everyday life, it is plain observation. Predators exploit it by aligning their pitch with your dominant desire. Not because they always want to harm you, but because they want something, and the most efficient route is to satisfy what you already crave. Desire conflicts are the quiet storms inside you. The rooms of the house do not always agree. The search for novelty can clash with the need for certainty. The drive for status may erode belonging if success isolates you from your circle. These conflicts create noise, and noise creates confusion. When your desires pull in different directions, decision-making becomes messy, and that messiness opens a door to influence. People who understand the conflict can present options that appear to resolve it. A product that promises both stability and excitement. A leader who claims to grant both power and community. When the solution they offer seems to reconcile your split wants, it feels irresistible. Often it is a clever patch that serves someone else more than it serves you. Vulnerability grows not only where one desire rules, but where 2 desires compete and leave you uncertain. In that gap, you become more open to external answers. If you value both belonging and status, but fear choosing one will lose the other, an influencer can propose a path that seems to give both, at least at first glance. That patchwork can bind you because you begin to rely on the external architect to keep the solution working. It is in these seams that manipulation is most likely to take hold. The map also offers hope. If you can name the dominant desires in your life, you gain power. Start by simple inventory. Where do you spend your attention and energy? What makes you restless? What purchases calm you? What compliments make you glow? Answers point to which rooms are full. Once you know which desire rules, you can test it. Try deliberately privileging a different room for a while. Favor steady routine if novel thrills rule you, or choose small risks if certainty has tightened your world. These experiments reveal whether a desire serves you or confines you. Another useful practice is to notice offers that resolve a conflict too easily. If someone promises to give you both what you crave and the certainty you fear losing, pause. Ask who benefits most from that arrangement. Often the sweet solution helps the presenter more than it heals you. Slow thinking and simple questions are effective defenses. What will this change in my life next year? Who gains if I accept this now? Does this choice build my independence or bind me to another's design? Compassion is essential in this work. Desires are not moral faults. They are survival strategies and meaning-making engines. The task is not to shame yourself for what you want, but to place your wants in a healthier architecture that requires small, steady choices. Aligning daily habits with long-term aims, choosing relationships that reflect your whole self rather than your brightest ache, and accepting that some comforts are short-lived while others require patience. Finally, remember that balance is dynamic. The throne may shift with seasons of life. Safety may rule in times of illness, novelty in times of youth. That fluidity is normal. The skill is to notice the change before someone else capitalizes on it. Map your desires often. Keep the rooms visible. When you know which parts of you are being courted, you can welcome help without surrendering your house to strangers. In that careful vigilance, desire becomes an instrument of your life again, not the secret lever of someone else. Chapter 6. Seduction Psychology. Turning desire into obsession. There is a small, polite crime that charm commits. It makes you think you found yourself when you were only being found. The sweetest flattery is often a map drawn by someone else, and you walk it willingly. Seduction begins as attention dressed like understanding. A charmer watches not only what you say, but how you say it. The tiny pauses between words, the images your sentences call up. Then they mirror those images back to you with a tenderness that feels rare. When someone reflects your private phrase back as if it were their own, you feel seen in a way that loosens your guard. That feeling, the rare recognition, is the seed of attachment. It promises a future in which your hidden self is not only noticed but desired. The truth is quieter and darker. The person who mirrors you is engineering a path into your inner rooms. The art of triggering desire is about timing and specificity. A general compliment is a breeze. A specific one that names a private ache is a hook. Charmers learn to name the small, peculiar things that most people miss. The way you tilt your head when you think, the joke you use when you are nervous, the phrase that betrays an old hurt. They place those observations into their speech, so you feel they understand you better than anyone. That sense of being known becomes intoxicating. It feels like home because home is where your quirks are safe. But safety can be manufactured. When that safety depends on another's constant attention, it becomes dependent. Mirroring is more than mimicry. It is a deliberate alignment with your inner fantasy. We all carry stories of who we might be, braver, kinder, more admired. Charmers do not merely flatter those stories. They step into them with you. They act as if your imagined self already exists. They speak in the voice of the future you hope for and then guide you toward choices that fit that narrative. This is why seduction can feel like destiny. The path laid by a charmer often follows the contours of your own longing. The danger is that the future they promise may center them, not you. One of the most effective methods is the bait and hook. The bait is intense, tailored attention, a sequence of moments designed to spike emotion. Compliments that land like revelations, small acts of service that look effortless, dramatic displays of understanding. These peaks create a sense of rapid intimacy. The hook is slower, a pattern of unpredictability and withdrawal that trains you to invest more to regain the high. Intermittent reward makes the heart chase more fiercely because unpredictability magnifies value. When warmth is sometimes withheld and then generously returned, The return feels larger than the original gift. You begin to measure your worth in the timing of someone else's attention. Emotional dependency grows when the external source of reward becomes more reliable than your inner resources. If your sense of being okay depends on another person's presence, you will arrange your life around their rhythms. You will notice small signals more anxiously, forgive greater slights, and rationalize behaviors you once would have named unacceptable. That tolerance is often mistaken for love, but it is a pattern of survival. The mind chooses what it believes will protect it from old fears. Fear of abandonment, shame, or insignificance, even if the protection costs autonomy. Charmers sometimes hide their methods behind narratives of passion or fate. This rhetorical cloak makes questioning feel like betrayal. If a story claims that only this person can complete you, doubts seem like a failure of imagination rather than a necessary check. The ethical seducer, if such a thing exists, offers shared growth without taking ownership of another's inner life. The manipulative seducer borrows your story to sell you a role, then tightens the script until leaving feels like losing yourself. Resistance is quieter than you expect. It often begins not with grand refusal, but with small habits that preserve your center. Keep a practice that belongs only to you. A morning routine, a creative habit, a friend who knows the story that predates the seduction. These anchors make it harder for someone else to become the sole source of your identity. Notice when attention feels like validation, and when it feels like a currency you must earn. Say no to invitations that require erasing parts of yourself to be accepted. Small refusals teach your nervous system that your worth does not hinge on another's mood. Compassion for yourself is necessary because charm can feel flattering and healing, especially when your life has been lonely or bruised. Recognize the relief without immediately accepting the terms. Ask quietly, who benefits if I stay? What will I lose? Does this relationship encourage me to keep the parts of myself I value? Or does it reward only the smallness that pleases another? These questions are simple tools that create breathing room in the heat of attraction. Finally, remember that desire is not shameful. The cruelty lies in turning desire into a lever without consent. Seduction becomes dangerous when it substitutes for mutuality, and when one person's power grows by aligning with another's aim. Learn to recognize the architecture of charm, the mirror that flatters, the bait that dazzles, the hook that tightens. When you can see those moves, you can choose whether to walk the map someone else draws or to redraw your own. In that choice is the difference between being enchanted and being owned. Chapter 7. Romantic Manipulation. When love isn't love. Love is a soft weapon when wielded by someone who knows how to press its edges. They wrap control in tenderness and call it devotion. Romance moves quickly into the private places of the heart because it speaks the language desire already knows. When you open to love, you lower certain walls. You allow another closer than most because closeness once meant survival. That biological generosity is a gift, but it is also what makes relationships fertile ground for control. The same longing that calls you to trust can be answered by someone who intends to guide your choices rather than share them. In those cases, the warmth you receive is not a mirror of love, but a map drawn to lead. One familiar form of this is love bombing, a sudden, extraordinary attentiveness that feels like rescue. It arrives as praise, grand gestures, constant messages, and an intensity that makes ordinary life pale by comparison. At first, it seems like showing up in the way you always wanted. You feel rare and chosen. That feeling is intoxicating because it aligns with a fundamental human wish to be seen as special. But the pattern often hides the beginning of a loop. The intense arrival is rarely matched by steady care. Once you are invested, the attention can be used to shape your behavior. The person who gave you everything suddenly becomes the person who can take it away, and that difference creates leverage. Validation loops work similarly but more quietly. When someone repeatedly affirms the parts of you they prefer, you learn to present those parts more. Compliments become a currency. You begin to smooth your edges to receive praise and avoid expressions that might lose it. Over time, your identity can shrink to the contours that win others' approval. This is not mutual growth. It is a slow tailoring of yourself to fit someone else's taste. The danger is subtle. You may not notice your change because praise feels like care. You only see the cost when the compliments stop or become conditional. Selective affection is the practiced withholding of warmth to elicit certain behaviors. It is not always cruel in a cartoonish way. Often it is dressed as a test or a boundary. A partner withdraws when you do not perform in the way they expect and returns when you comply. These small withdrawals teach you which actions restore closeness. Your nervous system learns to work for affection the same way a child learns which behavior soothes a parent. The result is dependence disguised as partnership. You are rewarded for being what another prefers and punished softly for being fully yourself. Perhaps the most dangerous trick is the illusion of specialness. Being told you are unique is a tender poison. The narrative that you two alone understand each other, that your connection is fated or rare, isolates you gently from other perspectives. It makes criticism feel like betrayal and encouragement from others like interference. When someone convinces you that your relationship is the axis on which your meaning turns, leaving or questioning the relationship feels like losing yourself. That feeling binds you emotionally long before any explicit rule is made. Patterns repeat because they work. People who want to influence often borrow from the language of love because it is effective. They match your private stories, mirror your vulnerabilities, and offer solutions that appear personal. Attraction becomes a tool when the other person places their needs above your autonomy. The manipulative partner does not need to be cruel. Often they are charming, clever, and even generous. Their methods are effective because they exploit the very things that make love possible: trust, vulnerability, and the wish for belonging. Breaking the pattern begins in the small, ordinary acts of noticing. Notice how you feel after the highs of early attention. Elated, yes, but also disoriented. Notice whether praise asks for change more than it offers acceptance. Ask whether affection is consistent or used as a reward for compliance. These observations are not cold calculations. They are gentle checks that bring clarity. When you name the pattern, love bombing, validation loop, selective affection, illusion of specialness, it loses some of its magic. You gain a choice: to accept the pattern because it serves you, or to refuse it because it narrows you. Boundaries are the practical tool here. They are not walls to shut love out, but fences that keep your ground intact, saying no to demands that erode your values, keeping friendships that remind you of your life beyond the relationship, and keeping habits that belong only to you are all acts of protection. They teach your partner that intimacy does not require your erasure. When a relationship rewards your wholeness rather than your smallness, it heals rather than harnesses. Compassion matters. Many who manipulate were themselves shaped by fear and need. That does not excuse harm, but it explains the pattern and allows you to respond in ways that protect you without becoming cruel in turn. You can be clear without being cruel, firm without being vengeful. That steadiness often reveals the true quality of a partner. Someone who steadies you in return is not trying to own your longing but to share it. Finally, remember that desire is human and love is a need. Neither should be weaponized against you. The work is to love without losing yourself, to accept tenderness without surrender, and to remember that being cherished should expand you rather than confine you. If love asks you to become smaller, it is not love. It is an architecture of control dressing itself in the language of the heart. Learn the signs, protect your center, and choose relationships that make room for the whole you. Chapter 8. Sexual Desire as a Tool of Control. there is a secret exchange that often goes unnamed. Attention to your body traded for power over your heart. Sex can be intimacy, but it can also be a currency someone spends to buy control. Sexual desire is raw and immediate. It presses through reason and lights parts of the brain that hunger for closeness and approval. When that hunger meets someone willing to give or withhold attention, a quiet market forms. Sexual validation, the look, the text, the touch that says you are wanted, becomes psychological currency. It buys relief from loneliness, proves desirability, and sometimes steadies a shaken sense of self. This currency is valuable because it answers old questions. Am I desired? Am I enough? But it becomes dangerous when others start to set the price. Fetish and fantasy are natural parts of human desire. They shape what people find exciting, meaningful, or safe. The problem begins when fantasies are deliberately engineered by another to shape your choices. Fantasy engineering is the practice of aligning your erotic scripts with someone else's agenda. It can be subtle. A partner who slowly normalizes a pattern until your private pleasure depends on an increasingly narrow scene, or a lover who outfits your sexuality with conditions. Affection only after a certain act, attention only when you perform a specific role. Over time, your erotic life can become a set of expectations someone else maintains, and you find yourself craving not just pleasure, but the particular approval that comes with it. Manipulation through fetish occurs when someone notices what reliably excites you, and then uses that fact to influence your behavior outside the bedroom. The dynamic is simple and corrosive. Reward the desired act with praise or intimacy, withdraw it when you resist, and repeat until compliance seems like the only path to connection. Because sexual validation touches deep sense-making systems, identity, worth, belonging, the effect is powerful. You may begin to conflate being wanted with being acceptable, and to accept conditions that once felt wrong. Power dynamics in sex are not always abusive. They can be consensual and nourishing when agreed upon freely and maintained with care. The troubling kind of sexual power arises when one person's agenda seeks to limit the other's autonomy. It is not just the physical control that matters, but the psychological pattern. Who holds the attention, who decides when affection is given, and who can remove it as punishment? When sexual attention becomes conditional, it becomes a tool for shaping emotions, choices, and self-image. There are familiar signs that desire is being used as leverage. If affection arrives mostly as a reward for compliance, if your boundaries are tested as a way to prove loyalty, or if intimacy is withheld to punish disagreement, the pattern is worth noticing. If your self-worth rises and falls with another's sexual interest, that is a clear red flag. Your inner scale has been calibrated to external validation. That calibration is often slow, built on small exchanges until the dependency is strong enough to steer decisions you would otherwise make differently. Understanding how this happens helps rather than shames. The brain is built to seek connection, and sexual attention is a potent form of connection. When life leaves us lonely, bruised, or uncertain, the quick fix of being desired looks like rescue. Many people who use sex to control are themselves responding to needs or patterns they learned earlier. That context does not excuse harm, but it does mean the behavior often grows from human vulnerabilities rather than pure malice. Protection starts with simple, steady acts. Name your boundaries clearly and practice keeping them. A boundary is not a test for the other person. It is a contract with yourself about what preserves your dignity. Notice whether consent is freely given in your sexual experiences, or whether it follows from fear of losing attention. Consent must be ongoing and enthusiastic. If it feels negotiated under pressure, it is not full consent. Keep small habits that belong just to you. Friends who remind you of your life outside sexual dynamics, activities that ground you, time alone to think without needing to perform. These anchors make it harder for sexual validation to become the only currency you accept. Language helps too. Speak about your needs and about what feels right and wrong in plain terms. If a request or pattern makes you uneasy, name it and test it slowly. Not because you owe explanation, but because clarity protects you. If someone responds to your boundaries by mocking, minimizing, or punishing you, that response speaks loudly about their respect for you. Compassion for yourself makes it easier to leave a dynamic that erodes you. Compassion for the other helps you see whether change is possible without sacrificing your safety. There is also the work of reclaiming erotic desire as yours. Explore what you want away from the pressure of proving yourself. Reconnect with pleasures that heal rather than demand. Build sexual scripts that include respect for your limits and celebration of your autonomy. When desire is guided by shared consent and mutual care, it becomes a source of meaning and joy, rather than a lever of control. Finally, remember that being sexual is human and beautiful. The shame around desire makes it easier for manipulation to hide. Speak kindly to yourself about your wants, and treat your boundaries like sacred promises. Desire need not be a trap. It can be a path to deeper connection when both people show up as whole, responsible adults. Guard your currency, notice who sets the price, and choose partners who pay with respect rather than demand payment for their attention. In that careful stewardship, sexual desire can return to being an expression of mutual life rather than the quiet engine of someone else's power. Chapter 9. Emotional Dependency and the Addiction to Being Wanted. There is a hunger that never looks like hunger, the quiet ache to be noticed, held, and chosen. When that ache becomes the rhythm of your life, you are no longer seeking love, you are chasing a drug. Wanting to be wanted is older than choice. As children, we learn that attention equals safety, a look that lingers, a voice that calms, a hand that stays. These were the currencies of survival. Those early lessons become shorthand. When attention arrives, the world feels less dangerous. Over time, the nervous system learns to prefer that state. Attention becomes soothing in itself, not only useful. The result is emotional dependency, a fragile architecture built from the desire to be kept in another's view. Dependency is not a moral failing, it is a biological and social fact. The problem begins when someone else notices this habit and starts to feed it on their terms. Manipulators are skilled at turning your need for connection into a lever. They offer the exact kind of attention that quiets your ache, and they time it so that you learn to come back for more. It is a slow training. Small acts of kindness paired with subtle demands, affection that arrives with strings you did not sign up for. The pattern repeats until the presence of the other person becomes the meter by which you measure your worth. What makes this dangerous is the way attention functions as both balm and measure. When praise or touch quiets the old fear, you feel relief that can be mistaken for love. Relief is powerful. It rewires the reward system. Each time attention soothes, your brain files that person as a reliable source of safety. That reliability creates a bridge between two things that should remain separate: your sense of value and another person's behavior. When your self-worth hinges on external notice, choices stop being yours. You begin to act not from desire, but from the hope of being seen. Manipulators know that people will do a lot to keep the warmth coming. They often use 3 quiet moves. First, they make themselves indispensable in small ways. Being the only one who understands a joke, the one who remembers a detail, the friend who shows up at the right moment. This creates gratitude and a sense of debt. Second, they shape the terms of giving. Affection is plentiful when you comply, scarce when you resist. Third, they calibrate withdrawal so that loss feels painful but not unbearable, just enough to keep you trying. These moves are not always dramatic. More often they are subtle, woven into conversation and care until the pattern feels natural. You can notice the conditioning in ordinary signs. One sign is emotional reactivity. Your mood swings with someone's availability. A text ignored makes your chest tighten. A compliment lifts you disproportionately. Another sign is the shrinking of your world. You prioritize someone's presence over friends, hobbies, or work that once mattered. You may find yourself editing your thoughts to fit what pleases them, or apologizing for needs that were once normal. A third sign is the fear of leaving. You imagine catastrophe if the person withdraws, even when evidence does not support such extremes. These signs do not require judgment, they require attention. Breaking the pattern begins with small, steady practices that rebuild your inner economy. The first practice is noticing without blame. Observe how your feelings follow someone else's behavior. Name it simply, "My mood rose when they praised me." Naming reduces shame and brings distance. The second practice is creating independent sources of attention and value. Reinvest in activities that reward you in reliable ways. A hobby that produces small, repeatable achievements. Friendships that witness you without requiring performance. Work that connects to competence rather than approval. These are not substitutes for love. They are scaffolding that keeps you whole when a relationship trembles. Set clear boundaries as a third practice. Boundaries are not punishments for others. They are agreements with yourself about what preserves your dignity. Saying no to demands that erode you. Limiting the time you spend with people who gamify attention. And protecting the habits that belong only to you are all ways of reclaiming your sense. Boundaries also reveal who respects you. People who respond to limits with curiosity and care are more likely allies than those who retaliate or punish. Compassion must thread through every step. Many who manipulate were themselves shaped by fear, and learned that control is a way to avoid being hurt. That knowledge does not excuse harm, but it helps you respond with clarity rather than rage. You can hold someone accountable without seeking to destroy them. You can leave patterns that hurt you while wishing the other person healing. That gentleness protects your heart from cynicism and keeps your compassion as a choice, not a trap. Slow, steady reclamation changes the nervous system. Repetition builds new habits. Choose a solitary morning routine. Respond to texts with a pause. Keep a small project that only you complete. Each act of self-consistency writes a new line into your inner ledger. I am reliable to myself. Over time, the balance of attention shifts. External notice remains pleasant but not essential. Your self-worth begins to reflect your own steady measure. Finally, remember that being wanted is not the enemy. The problem is when being wanted becomes the only way you know how to be. Love, friendship, and desire should enlarge you, not shrink you. The deepest freedom comes when your need for connection is honored without becoming your only compass. Notice the patterns, practice small refusals, and rebuild quiet sources of worth. When you stop trading your center for someone else's approval, you reclaim the ability to be with others from a place of freedom rather than from a place of need. That is the true antidote to the addiction of being wanted. Chapter 10. Social manipulation. Controlling groups through desire. Power is most effective when it feels invisible, when it persuades without the flicker of a command. Desire is its silent engine, and when harnessed at scale, it can move crowds as if they were a single heartbeat. Humans are wired to belong. From the earliest moments of life, we seek the warmth of acceptance, the quiet reassurance that we are recognized by others. That instinct, once necessary for survival, becomes a lever in the hands of marketers, leaders, and influencers. They do not simply offer products or ideas. They offer belonging, a promise that by joining, buying, or agreeing, you will be seen, valued, and safe. Desire is reframed as identity. To want this, to follow that, is to be part of a story that feels larger than yourself. Mass desire engineering is subtle but deliberate. Images, words, and symbols are chosen to align with unspoken needs. A commercial does not merely sell a car, it sells freedom, status, the admiration of peers. A political message does not only promise policies, it promises identity, moral worth, the approval of a group. Influencers craft their narratives to resonate with private dreams, tapping into the silent scripts you carry about who you wish to be. These messages often feel personal, though they are broadcast to millions, because they are tailored to the desires that unite groups rather than just individuals. Identity manipulation works because people are malleable when they feel seen. The promise of belonging, the sense that we are together, we are special, we are right, taps into a deep craving for certainty and safety. When you are made to feel that your value comes from being part of a collective, you begin to align your thoughts and actions with the collective's rhythm. Disagreement is frightening. Divergence feels like exclusion. This is how groups can move as one, embracing ideas or behaviors they might never have accepted alone. Belonging becomes a reward and deviation becomes a subtle punishment. The dynamics are everywhere. Social media algorithms magnify what people already desire, offering repeated affirmations that what you want is what others want too. Advertising becomes immersive, mixing your private dreams with public trends. Leaders appeal not just to logic but to emotion, tapping into insecurities and longings that feel personal but are universal. They create the illusion that your deepest wants are recognized, when in truth, they are tools for steering behavior. The more you feel that someone else gets you, the more you will follow, buy, or believe what they suggest. Influence feels gentle because it often mirrors what you already long for. When a trend or idea aligns with private fantasies, your approval is almost automatic. Your identity feels validated, as if someone whispered the truth about who you are and who you could be. That whisper, however, is rarely neutral. It nudges you toward outcomes that benefit others more than yourself. The subtlety of this manipulation is what makes it so effective. It rarely feels like coercion. Instead, it feels like choice, desire, and belonging, all entwined. Resistance is quiet but possible. It begins with awareness, noticing the patterns that make you act without conscious reflection. Observe when your sense of value depends on agreement. When excitement arises because a group validates your longings rather than your actions. Ask yourself if the desires you are chasing are yours, or if they have been shaped by repeated exposure, praise, or projection. Small acts of choice, stepping back from trends, questioning slogans, valuing private judgment over collective applause, create space between your mind and the currents that pull at it. Boundaries scale too, even in social contexts. Choosing how much attention to give to messages, platforms, or leaders preserves your autonomy. Seeking feedback from trusted friends who exist outside the mass narrative offers perspective. Engaging with diverse voices disrupts the echo chambers that amplify desire manipulation. These steps are not isolation, they are calibration, restoring the link between internal value and external influence. The freedom to want independently becomes a shield against the subtle engineering of mass behavior. Compassion remains important. Recognize that many people who steer mass desire are themselves navigating the same human vulnerabilities, longing for approval, recognition, and power. Understanding the psychology behind the manipulation allows you to respond thoughtfully rather than reactively. You can separate strategy from intent, influence from integrity without assuming that every guide or advertiser is malicious. Awareness, not cynicism, becomes your tool. Finally, remember that desire itself is not the enemy. It is the most human of impulses, a source of creativity, connection, and pleasure. The danger comes when desire is redirected to serve others' agendas rather than your own growth. By noticing the invisible strings, questioning who sets the rules for your wants, and claiming small yet steady choices in alignment with your values, you preserve freedom within collective spaces. When desire is guided rather than hijacked, it becomes a bridge to life fully lived, rather than a leash that tugs without your consent. Chapter 11. Desire-Based Persuasion Tactics. Desire is a quiet tyrant. It does not shout, it does not demand, yet it can bend reason, twist priorities, and guide choices before the mind fully knows what is happening. Those who understand this law of human nature do not need threats. They only need to know which strings to pull. Persuasion begins where logic ends. The mind, for all its pride in reasoning, is not the captain of its own ship. Beneath the surface, emotions steer, and desire is the current that carries most of us. Skilled influencers, whether in politics, advertising, or more insidious spaces like cults, exploit this invisible current. They understand that a well-timed image, phrase, or reward can bypass reason entirely. They work not by coercion, but by crafting the circumstances in which your wants align perfectly with their aims. The leverage comes from making what they want you to do feel like what you already secretly want yourself. There are 10 powerful levers they use, each one a subtle twist of human nature. So leverage consists. Scarcity, for example, turns a simple object into a treasure, because the mind fears missing out. Social proof exploits our drive to belong, showing that everyone desires the same thing, and prompting us to follow without questioning. Authority leverages trust, and the instinct to obey those who seem knowledgeable or powerful. Reciprocity makes a gift or favor feel like a debt, nudging us to comply. Liking creates compliance by generating affection. We do more for those we admire or find attractive. Commitment and consistency encourage small initial agreements that escalate into larger behaviors. Novelty captures attention by triggering the brain's reward systems. Framing shapes perception, turning the same situation into opportunity or threat. Anchoring sets a reference point, altering our sense of value. And finally, emotional contagion transmits feelings from one person to another, shaping desire through resonance rather than argument. Each of these levers operates quietly, often invisibly, because they connect to desires we barely notice. Scarcity works because we want what seems forbidden. Social proof works because we want to be accepted. They do not ask permission, and they often override logic. A person may know a product is unnecessary, a belief unwise, or a demand unreasonable, yet desire shaped by these levers compels action anyway. The subtle genius of desire-based persuasion is that it makes the choice feel like your own. Real-life examples are everywhere. In advertising, a commercial will not just sell a phone. It sells prestige, attention, and belonging. The camera frames the lifestyle, the music signals excitement, and the narrative whispers that owning it transforms your social identity. In politics, slogans and rallies craft collective longing for security, respect, victory, or moral righteousness. Leaders create experiences where desire for approval, certainty, and belonging converge, and the individual follows as if of their own volition. Cult psychology takes this to extremes, using rituals, repetition, and selective reward to remake identity itself, aligning private desire entirely with the group's agenda. The tools are the same, only the scale and intensity differ. The danger lies not in desire itself, but in its manipulation. When someone shapes your wants for their gain, you act not from clarity but from engineered hunger. You do what you would not otherwise do, justify it as natural, and feel compelled to repeat it. The process is elegant because it feels intimate. This is what I wanted all along, yet it is often the culmination of invisible levers, carefully timed and applied, and rarely accidental. Awareness begins by noticing patterns. Observe how you respond to urgency, scarcity, or flattery. Ask whether social cues push you toward choices that align with your values or only with someone else's benefit. Pay attention to repeated messaging that evokes excitement or fear, and note the impulses it triggers. The goal is not to remove desire. That is impossible, but to reclaim the direction of it. By seeing the levers in motion, you can step back and choose when to act, when to pause, and when to question. Small acts of reclamation matter. Pause before decisions that feel urgent. Test whether rewards or punishments are internal or external, and allow curiosity to question why a certain idea or object seems so compelling. Diversify sources of influence. Talk with people who do not have a stake in your choice. Give yourself experiences that confirm your judgment rather than your appetite. Each act builds autonomy, a subtle shield against the currents that would otherwise carry you. Compassion remains a guiding principle. Recognize that manipulators are often exploiting universal truths about human nature, not targeting you out of personal malice. Understanding the psychological mechanics allows insight without resentment. It allows you to navigate social, commercial, and political landscapes with presence rather than reflex, choosing engagement over submission. Desire becomes a tool, not a trap. Finally, remember that awareness transforms the power of desire. It is not a curse to want. It is a map to self-understanding. The difference between being moved by your own longing and being moved by someone else's design lies in consciousness. By seeing the levers, naming the pulls, and tracing your impulses back to their source, you reclaim choice. Desire becomes a companion, guiding toward fulfillment rather than a lever that someone else uses to shape your life. In that reclamation, you are no longer a puppet, but the keeper of your own heart. Chapter 12. When desire turns against you, there is a shadow in the heart of every want, a place where longing becomes a chain. Desire, the force that drives life forward, can also become a trap, pulling you toward choices that harm instead of heal. It whispers that fulfillment is just one more step away, while each step tightens its grip. Obsession begins quietly. A thought that lingers longer than it should, an idea or person that occupies the mind beyond reason. It may start as fascination, curiosity, or hope, and slowly it becomes a compulsion. Compulsion is desire untethered from judgment. It does not pause to ask if this is right or safe. It only pushes, insisting on satisfaction. The mind rationalizes, rewrites the narrative, and convinces itself that the next act, the next encounter, the next thought will finally quiet the ache. But it never does. Desire has turned predator, and you are its prey. Trauma bonding is one of the darkest expressions of this term. It happens when intense experiences, fear, pain, relief, and reward are interwoven so tightly that attachment grows stronger in the very places where harm occurs. A harsh word followed by tenderness, a moment of neglect countered by attention, a conflict balanced by apology. These patterns teach the nervous system to equate instability with connection. Over time, people find themselves drawn back to the very source of hurt, because the emotional high of relief becomes addictive. They are not weak. They are wired to seek safety in the pattern, even when the pattern is dangerous. Even intelligent people are not immune. Reason cannot always override the currents of desire that have been rehearsed for years. The brain is designed to find meaning, to seek connection, and to pursue reward. When desire is manipulated, whether through subtle emotional signals, consistent validation and withdrawal, or well-crafted narratives, the mind often follows its own longing into peril. Insight does not prevent obsession. It sometimes deepens it, because the very act of knowing can make the desire feel more urgent, more personal, and more justified. Self-destructive desires take many forms. They may be the yearning for a person who is unavailable, the craving for experiences that bring temporary pleasure and long-term harm, or the need for recognition in spaces that diminish rather than nurture. Each is amplified when external forces exploit them. A manipulator can tune into the hidden ache behind the craving, shaping words, gestures, and situations so that the person feels compelled to act. It is not coercion in the obvious sense. It is engineering of internal pressure. The mind comes to believe that choice is free, even as it walks along a carefully constructed track. Breaking this cycle is not simple, but it is possible. Awareness is the first step. Naming the pattern, observing the repetition, and noticing the emotional cues that pull you toward it. Understanding trauma bonding, compulsive desire, and the way intelligence can be seduced by manipulation helps to separate action from impulse. Journaling, reflection, and honest conversation with someone outside the pattern create mirrors that show the machinery at work. These tools do not remove desire. They illuminate it, making it visible rather than invisible. Boundaries become essential. A boundary is a promise to oneself about what is safe, acceptable, and nourishing. Maintaining them is a daily practice, especially when the object of desire or the source of manipulation seems irresistible. Boundaries are not punishment or coldness. They are preservation of the self. They create space for rational thought, emotional recovery, and deliberate action. Each time a boundary holds, the grip of obsession loosens, even if only a little. Compassion also matters. There is no shame in being drawn into patterns of destructive desire. These currents are human, ancient, and universal. The task is not to blame yourself for the intensity of your longing, but to witness it, understand it, and redirect it. Compassion allows reflection without guilt, courage without recklessness, and healing without denial. It teaches the mind that desire can exist without domination, that longing can be honored without surrender. Recovery is slow. Small victories, choosing not to act, stepping back from the source of harm, nurturing parts of yourself outside the pattern, accumulate into new habits. Over time, the nervous system learns a different rhythm. Relief is possible without submission, pleasure without dependency, attention without coercion. Desire becomes a guide rather than a jailer. Ultimately, the turning point comes when you reclaim agency. When you recognize that the same desire that once enslaved you can also teach you about your values, needs, and resilience. You move from victim to witness. Desire does not disappear, but it changes character. It becomes a teacher, pointing toward what matters without dictating what you must do. The chains fall not because desire is gone, but because you have learned to hold them lightly, to watch them, and to walk freely while they exist. Desire is neither good nor evil. Its power is inevitable. The question is whether you are led by it or whether you hold the reins. By observing, understanding, and protecting yourself, you transform the darkest impulses into a mirror, one that reflects your own heart, your own choices, and your own freedom. The danger exists, yes, but so does the possibility of mastery. In that balance, desire turns from a silent predator into a companion, guiding your life without controlling it. Chapter 13. Mastering Self-Awareness. There is a hidden architect inside your mind, quietly shaping your choices, nudging you towards certain desires, and whispering directions before you even realize you are listening. Most people never meet this architect. They live as if they are in full control, while invisible currents pull their thoughts, emotions, and decisions in ways they cannot name. True mastery begins when you turn to observe yourself, when you see the hidden patterns that have always guided you. Self-awareness is more than noticing behavior. It is the practice of tracing the invisible lines between what you feel, what you want, and why. It is recognizing that every impulse may have roots deeper than your conscious mind allows. Some desires are obvious: hunger, comfort, safety. Others are subtle, buried beneath layers of habit, expectation, and social influence. These unconscious desires often dictate your decisions more than reason ever could. You might feel drawn to people, experiences, or ideas without understanding the deep need they are fulfilling. They are like a shadow that shapes your life without stepping into the light. To master self-awareness, begin with attention. Observe the moments when you react before you think. Notice what triggers discomfort, excitement, or longing. Triggers are the fingerprints of your vulnerabilities. They mark the spots where old patterns, unresolved emotions, or unmet needs live. Someone interrupts your plan and you feel irritation that seems disproportionate. A compliment sends a rush of elation. A slight exclusion sparks anxiety. These are not random reactions. They are signals from the hidden architecture of desire. By paying attention to them, you begin to map your internal landscape. Patterns emerge when observation becomes consistent. Repetition reveals the mental habits that keep you controllable. Perhaps you respond to praise with compliance, or to criticism with withdrawal. Perhaps you chase novelty, or cling to familiarity in ways that leave you vulnerable to influence. These habits are not weaknesses. They are survival mechanisms learned over time. Yet when they operate without conscious guidance, they can be exploited. Mastery comes when you recognize these patterns and can choose whether to follow them or redirect them. Emotional vulnerabilities are the threads that link desire to action. Fear, longing, shame, and hope are all levers. When you understand which emotions are most easily manipulated, you gain the ability to step back rather than be swept along. For example, if you notice that approval shapes most of your choices, you can pause before responding to praise or criticism, weighing the action against your values rather than your need for validation. If you see that fear of loss drives behavior, you can ask whether the loss is real or constructed, and whether your response serves you or someone else. Awareness of these emotional currents creates a space between impulse and action, a space where choice lives. Self-awareness also requires honesty. It asks you to look at your motives without judgment, to see where desire has led you astray, and to accept that you are not always rational or consistent. The mind naturally defends itself with excuses, denial, and projection, but mastery demands patience and clarity. You must learn to witness your thoughts and feelings as if they are data, not verdicts. Curiosity replaces shame. Observation replaces blame. This stance allows you to uncover the unconscious desires that subtly guide your life. Mental habits can either reinforce control or free you from it. Automatic thinking, avoidance, or constant comparison often make you easy to manipulate. Mindfulness, reflection, and deliberate decision-making weaken those automatic responses. When you practice noticing your impulses, questioning their origins, and choosing your actions, you rewire the patterns that once left you vulnerable. Each small act of conscious attention strengthens your independence. The invisible levers lose their power when you shine light upon them. Mastering self-awareness is not a one-time achievement. It is a lifelong practice. The hidden currents of desire shift as life unfolds. New experiences, relationships, and challenges expose fresh vulnerabilities. Yet the habit of observing yourself, questioning impulses, and mapping your emotional landscape equips you with the tools to navigate influence without surrendering control. The more you understand the architecture within, the less likely you are to be moved by forces outside it. Compassion is essential throughout this process. Self-awareness is not a path to self-criticism. It is a path to understanding, to seeing your desires and vulnerabilities without judgment, and to reclaiming the power that comes from clarity. Recognize that your impulses are human, that everyone is susceptible to invisible guidance. and that the work of observation is what transforms vulnerability into strength. In the end, mastering self-awareness turns the hidden architect into an ally. You begin to act intentionally rather than react automatically. Desire becomes a compass rather than a leash. Triggers still arise, patterns still repeat, and emotions still surge, but now you can observe, choose, and redirect. You become the keeper of your own mind, the one who sets the rules for which desires shape your life. And in that mastery, freedom emerges, not from denying desire, but from knowing it deeply, honoring it wisely, and guiding it consciously. Chapter 14. Psychological Boundaries and Desire Detox. Desire is a delicate instrument. In the right hands, it guides, motivates, and inspires. In the wrong hands, it becomes a weapon, a chain that binds the mind to someone else's agenda. The tragedy is that most people never notice until the grip has become familiar, until their wants feel like themselves but are carefully designed by others. To reclaim freedom, one must learn to detox, to clear the mind and heart of the residues of manipulation, and to rebuild the internal architecture that governs desire. The first step is recognizing the contamination. Toxic desires are often subtle. They arrive as persistent thoughts about someone or something that leaves you unsettled, anxious, or dependent. They might be the lure of approval from a person who never truly values you, the craving for recognition that comes at the expense of your peace, or the compulsion to chase fleeting pleasure that erodes stability. These are not desires in their natural form. They are echoes of influence, shaped by external forces that know exactly how to pull at your emotional reward system. Noticing them requires honesty and courage. It is easier to pretend they are normal, but detox begins with seeing the distortion clearly. Boundaries are the second act. Psychological boundaries are not walls. They are filters, guides, and protectors. They define where your desires belong to you and where influence begins. Saying no, stepping back, limiting exposure to sources of manipulation, these are not acts of weakness. They are declarations of autonomy. They create the space necessary to observe your own impulses without interference, to let the emotional system reset, and to separate what is genuinely yours from what has been implanted. Boundaries must be enforced consistently, with patience and care, because the mind resists sudden change and old patterns attempt to sneak back through gaps. Detoxing from toxic desires also requires rewriting internal scripts. Many patterns are encoded in the language we tell ourselves. I need this to be happy. I cannot live without their approval. I am only valuable if I achieve this recognition. These statements, repeated over years, shape the reward circuits of the brain. To detox, you must challenge and replace them. Replace fear of loss with awareness of choice. Replace dependency on validation with acknowledgement of self-worth. Replace craving for control by others with curiosity about your own motives. The goal is not to suppress desire, but to reclaim it, to make it responsive to your conscious intentions rather than someone else's manipulation. The emotional reward system is at the center of this process. It is easily exploited because it responds to repetition, novelty, and intensity. Manipulators know this instinctively. They engineer highs and lows, intermittent rewards, and tailored experiences to create compulsion. Detox requires recalibration. Slow, consistent exposure to what genuinely fulfills. Creativity, connection, achievement, curiosity allows the brain to relearn what is nourishing. Over time, the emotional system becomes less reactive to external triggers designed to control you, and more attuned to signals that reflect your own values and priorities. Detox is both a mental and practical exercise. It may involve limiting interactions with people who consistently manipulate or trigger destructive desires. It may involve reassessing routines, social media, or environments that subtly shape longing for things that serve others more than yourself. It requires creating new habits that reinforce autonomy and provide healthy emotional stimulation. Journaling, meditation, reflection, and intentional engagement with meaningful activities help rewrite the habitual responses that once left you vulnerable. The process is gradual, like training a muscle that has been dormant or misused. Compassion remains central. Detox is not punishment for being human, it is care for yourself. Recognize that every person is susceptible to influence, that all minds carry unconscious desires, and that reclaiming control is a skill, not a moral test. Treat yourself gently during setbacks and view progress in terms of awareness rather than perfection. Each observation, each decision to step back, each act of saying no, strengthens your autonomy and rewires the pathways that once served external control. In the long term, boundaries and detox combine to create freedom. Desire, once hijacked, becomes a trusted guide again. You can pursue what is meaningful, satisfying, and aligned with your values without fear of being led by someone else's design. The mind becomes a sanctuary rather than a battlefield. Emotional rewards are earned, chosen and aligned with your inner compass rather than with manipulative patterns. Ultimately, psychological boundaries and desire detox are acts of reclaiming the self. They are declarations that your mind, heart, and wants belong to you. Desire is not eliminated. It is purified, clarified, and placed under conscious guidance. The chains of manipulation fall not because desire disappears, but because awareness, boundaries, and intentional practice redirect its energy. Freed from the exploitation of others, you discover that longing can be a source of insight, motivation, and joy rather than a lever of control. In this space, desire becomes a companion, a teacher, and a guide, not a trap. Chapter 15. Rebuilding Authentic Desire. Desire is a fragile flame. It can warm the soul, light the way, and guide action with purpose, or it can be stolen, redirected, and made to serve someone else's will while you believe it is your own. The most insidious form of control is the one that masquerades as your longing, convincing you that what you seek is natural, inevitable, and deeply personal, when in fact it has been carefully planted, nurtured, and timed to bind you. Rebuilding authentic desire is the work of reclaiming that flame, learning to distinguish what is truly yours from what has been borrowed, stolen, or imposed. The first step is noticing the subtle differences between real desire and implanted desire. Real desire carries a sense of alignment with your values and your inner self. It feels curious, expansive, and steady. It grows from genuine interest or need, and while it can be passionate, it does not feel like an urgent compulsion that bypasses reason. Implanted desire, on the other hand, often comes with intensity designed to pressure you into action. It may feel irresistible, urgent, or even shame-laden if ignored. It is usually tied to external validation or fleeting reward rather than enduring satisfaction. The mind can mistake these signals for personal wants because they are tailored to echo your vulnerabilities, but awareness allows you to pause and question the source. To rebuild authentic desire, you must practice conscious choice. Every time you pause before reacting to a craving, every time you ask yourself why a particular want feels so compelling, you create space between impulse and action. You begin to observe the forces shaping your mind, identifying which pulls are external and which originate from your own values. Conscious choice does not eliminate desire. It redirects its energy. It allows longing to serve growth rather than dependency, to illuminate paths that are meaningful rather than engineered. Over time, this practice strengthens the ability to recognize true wants in the moment they arise. Creating self-driven desire also involves cultivating internal validation. When the need for approval, attention, or reward from others diminishes in influence, you discover clarity in your own impulses. You can enjoy what you want without fear or guilt and reject what has been suggested or imposed. Internal validation anchors desire in your own experience, rather than in the reactions of others. It requires patience, reflection, and sometimes solitude, moments when you can sense what excites, motivates, and fulfills you without external interference. In this space, desire becomes a compass rather than a leash. Another essential aspect of rebuilding desire is experimentation. You must allow yourself to explore without judgment, to follow curiosity, and to test which longings feel authentic and which feel like shadows of someone else's design. This may involve trying new activities, forming new connections, or simply observing how your attention flows when unpressured. Patterns will emerge. Certain impulses will feel nourishing, expansive, and sustainable, while others will feel draining, manipulative, or reactive. Learning to trust these signals strengthens your ability to act from self-directed desire. The process also involves rewriting internal scripts that have previously reinforced dependency or manipulation. Thoughts like "I must want this to belong" I am incomplete without this recognition, or I cannot be happy unless I achieve this approval, must be challenged and replaced. Instead, cultivate scripts that reflect autonomy. I can want freely. My choices are guided by my own values, and fulfillment comes from alignment with myself. These new narratives rewire the brain to seek satisfaction in authenticity rather than compulsion, gradually dismantling the old circuits that left you vulnerable. Boundaries remain crucial. Even when desire is authentic, it can be misread or influenced by others. Maintaining boundaries protects the autonomy of your wants, keeping the flame of authentic desire from being extinguished by external pressures. Boundaries create a safe space where impulses can arise naturally, be examined consciously, and be acted upon with clarity. They prevent external manipulation from slipping in unnoticed, preserving the integrity of self-driven longing. Patience and self-compassion guide the journey. Rebuilding authentic desire is not instantaneous. The mind has been conditioned, often for years, to respond to engineered wants. Mistakes will happen. Old patterns may resurface. Each moment of awareness, however, is progress. Compassion allows you to observe setbacks without judgment, to learn from them, and to return to conscious choice with renewed understanding. The process is iterative, gentle, and cumulative. In the end, authentic desire transforms life from reactive to intentional. It turns the energy that once fueled compulsions into motivation aligned with personal values. It allows curiosity, passion, and longing to coexist with autonomy. You begin to act because you genuinely want to, not because someone else has designed the path. Each decision, each pursuit becomes a reflection of your own inner architecture rather than an echo of external influence. Rebuilding authentic desire is more than reclaiming wants. It is reclaiming yourself. It is the process of taking the flame that was manipulated, polishing it, and placing it firmly in your own hands. Desire becomes a guide, a teacher, and a companion rather than a tool of control. When you act from your authentic wants, life is lived on your terms. You are no longer a passenger on currents shaped by others. You are the navigator of your own inner compass, and every longing you follow illuminates a path that belongs wholly to you. Conclusion. You are no longer controllable. The moment you understand the architecture of your own desire, the hidden currents that have guided your choices, the impulses that were never entirely your own, you step into a territory few ever reach. It is a quiet, almost invisible shift at first. The world looks the same. The people around you seem unchanged. But inside, something fundamental has shifted. You are no longer as easily swayed. The strings that once pulled you now lie in your hands, and for the first time you can choose whether to follow them, reshape them, or release them entirely. True psychological freedom feels subtle yet profound. It is not the absence of desire, it is the mastery of it. You still feel longing, curiosity, and attachment, but these impulses are yours. They do not manipulate you, nor do they dictate your actions. You notice them, understand them, and decide how to respond. The sense of control is quiet, almost meditative. There is no need to fight every impulse, because you recognize which are authentic and which are echoes of others' designs. You move through the world with a clarity that transforms even ordinary interactions into conscious choices. Understanding desire reshapes relationship. You no longer enter connections blind to the ways others might influence your emotions. You notice manipulation not as paranoia, but as information, signals that allow you to set boundaries, ask questions, and preserve autonomy. Conversations become negotiations of respect rather than battles of hidden influence. The power to observe without being swept along transforms intimacy. You recognize that attraction, admiration, and longing can exist without surrender, and you engage with others from a place of awareness rather than need. Confidence blossoms naturally from this awareness. When your choices align with your authentic desires, self-assurance follows. You no longer seek validation from the right words, gestures, or attention of others. Approval becomes optional because your internal compass guides your decision. The energy once spent on worrying about influence, on guessing intentions or managing impressions, is now available to focus on growth, creativity, and action. You move with purpose rather than reaction, and this deliberate presence radiates a form of authority that cannot be imposed, only respected as power in its truest sense is born from autonomy. When you know your vulnerabilities and have taken responsibility for your impulses, you are no longer easily controlled by anyone, friends, lovers, leaders, or strangers. Others may still try to influence, but influence requires cooperation. When your cooperation is conscious and your alignment clear, their leverage diminishes. You gain the rare ability to participate in the social world without being dictated by invisible hands. And this freedom transforms your sense of agency in every sphere of life. The roadmap for lifelong emotional autonomy is simple in principle, though demanding in practice. It begins with observation, noticing your impulses, triggers, and reactions as if watching from a slight distance. It continues with reflection, questioning why you feel, what patterns repeat, and which desires are genuinely yours. Boundaries and detox follow, creating space to separate authentic wants from implanted ones. Then comes reconstruction, rewriting internal scripts, exploring authentic desires, and practicing choice consistently. Finally, it is sustained through patience, compassion, and continuous attention. Autonomy is not a state to be achieved once. It is a living process, a practice of conscious engagement with your own mind and heart. Along this path, mistakes will happen. Old desires may resurface. Influence may creep in when vigilance falters, but these moments are no longer failures. They are data, feedback, and reminders that freedom is a skill, not a destination. Each observation, each act of conscious choice, strengthens the internal architecture that protects your autonomy. The chains of past manipulation loosen, leaving you lighter, clearer, and increasingly free to follow the impulses that truly belong to you. You may notice a shift in how the world responds. Some people will be drawn to your clarity, others unsettled by it. That is natural. Autonomy can be intimidating because it resists the usual mechanisms of control. Yet this is precisely the gift. You move through life guided by inner knowledge, choosing how to engage, when to trust, and what to desire. The landscape of relationships, work, and personal growth transforms because you are no longer a passenger in someone else's design. You are the navigator of your own experience. The final truth is simple but profound. Once you know desire, once you know yourself, no one can control you without your consent. Freedom does not lie in avoiding longing, nor in suppressing it, but in understanding it, mastering it, and letting it serve your chosen path. Life becomes less a series of reactions to external forces and more a deliberate expression of self. You walk with clarity, act with intention, and desire with authenticity. In this space, the mind is no longer a battlefield but a sanctuary. You are awake, you are present, and for the first time you are truly free. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to Audiobook Vision. Click the like button to keep this work alive. Share it with someone you care about, and tell me in the comments what your favorite part of the video was. Thank you. See you next.